even more remarkable than the cart is Nolan being the business owner and the one who's in the hole. God bless him for that, right? That is a class act.
I would imagine a lot of people would look at that job and be like, no, thanks, because it
can't be done.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Brian Pontilillo.
Hey, Patrick.
Good to see you, Brian.
Likewise.
Rob Wadsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Hey, guys.
Thanks, Rob. And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hello.
You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. So we're going to do a little different order of things today. I want to start off by reading an email we got from one of our listeners, Mark. And his subject line was difficult conversations, and I'm just going to read that right away. Hey, Patrick, I tuned into last week's regular podcast with great expectation as to what the crew would say about the events of the week. I was disappointed, although not surprised, that nothing was said about the assault on our democracy. It dawned on me that having you, Rob, Brian, Matt, Kylie in my head for so long that I had come to rely on you all for a measure of truth, common sense, even support. I completely understand why FHB might have decided that discussion of a political insurrection did not belong amidst the discussion of perfect roofs and heated decks, particularly given the diversity of opinions likely in your audience. But if the pandemic is worthy of discussion, you in fact start every Pro Talk podcast with a question about it, so does an erosion of faith in government. As to what one can say about the violence and terror, a denial of facts, and an assault on our institutions, that's a more difficult question. Perhaps just a simple recognition that this is a difficult time for folks, that our strength comes from our diversity of opinion, whether it's cellulose versus XPS or our trust in our democratic institutions. If most of your audience is angry or sad, shell-shocked or anxious, distrustful of facts, or of the new faces of our citizenry, it would seem to be important to recognize that fact. Like it or not, you all have assumed a leadership role in the building community. Your words have power, and that's a good thing. Now, figuring out to do with that megaphone is the challenge. Stating the obvious seems like a good place to start. Best to you all, Mark. Well, Mark, thanks for the email. On our own defense, we haven't recorded since the events of Wednesday. The most recent number 317 was recorded the Tuesday before. So when we last saw each other, we had no idea what was going on. So I think you said it better than I could, Mark, and I do appreciate your bringing this to our attention.
Yeah, I think Mark hit a few important points here, and first of all, he's right. In the fact that this discussion probably doesn't belong on our podcast. You know, our podcast is about home building, and you know, I would argue that the pandemic is having an impact on how builders build, and that's why it makes sense for you, Patrick, to speak about that with builders right now during this time. But I also think he's right that it's worth acknowledging that it is a tough time for our country, and I think the more that, and for for all of us, and I think the more that we acknowledge that, we all take the opportunity to take a deep breath and come together a little bit, and the great thing about a very subject matter specific podcast or TV show or whatever it is you're into, anything social really, and I think our podcast very much falls into that category, the way we run it with listener feedback and listener questions. So anything social, these subject matters give us a chance to come together. I also agree with him that there's a lot of strength in diversity and diversity of opinions, and by the nature of us doing a podcast, we're sort of forced to have opinions, right? There's certainly facts in home building. How a structure stands is a matter of physics, not opinion. But there's many ways to get to similar or even the same results in the kind of in the kind of work that we do. And what I want to share is that I want to take the opportunity to share, and kind of hold our own feet to the fire. Is that I hope that as we do this podcast, as we make our magazine, as we publish on our website, all the different things we do, our videos, I hope that we live up to that challenge of being willing to share our opinions, being willing to share our opinions, and also sharing and respecting the opinions of others, so that what we do does foster a community that thrives on, thrives with a high level of respect for each other and for our differing opinions on, not only how to cut framing materials as efficiently as possible, but also what's important in home building, what's important for us to be focused on. And yeah, I guess that's plenty. I think he said it really well.
Thank you all for listening, if you're still with us.
I thought I was going to respond to that very briefly, but then these are challenging things to respond to, and it's always good time for us to think about what we do.
Yeah, can I just say one thing? Because I'm connected to our social media and our web, and the sort of the most direct conduit to our audience. And the one thing I can say is that as much strife as there seems to be on social media and media in general, the thing that makes us what we are is the fact that we have this strong community that is really willing and excited to share what they do with each other to make all of our lives and all of our work better. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I'm proud to work for Fine Homebuilding, is because of the community that is built up around us based on the integrity of what we do.
Okay, last thing, and this is constructive feedback for our listeners and our readers, particularly magazine readers. When you disagree with us, we often get kind of angry feedback. And the reason angry feedback doesn't work is because we can't publish it in the magazine. So when you disagree with us, write us or call us or email us get deep into why you disagree with us. Tell us why, so that then we can share that. When we get angry feedback, it's not helpful because it's hard to share.
Yeah. So last night, Rob, you put up on our Slack channel some photographs of a pretty interesting thing you're doing in your basement. And I think we talked about it, I don't know, either last time or the time before, but can you tell folks what you've been doing in your basement?
You mean one of those projects that I think many months ago you told me seems kind of like a stupid idea, is to put a plywood floor in a basement, a sub-grade basement?
Would I ever say that, Rob?
Well, I don't know. You just love to pick on my projects. I think that's what it comes down to. But anyway, I've lived in this house for 19 years now, actually, and I've never known what to do with this cave of a basement that I have, and I've always had other projects that seem more important. But especially in the winter, I kind of go stir crazy not having a place to tinker with projects, and I just felt like one of the best ways to clean up my basement was to put a insulated plywood floor throughout the whole thing. Not plywood; it's actually Advantech.
So you have sleepers, foam, and Advantech that you've put down, and despite the loss of ceiling height and the riskiness of putting wood products in a damp space, this is better than what you got, I would assume.
Yes, in fact, the whole system is I sort of build a bathtub out of the thickest polyethylene sheeting that I could find. I've used some various tapes to put it together that work really well with that. Then I put down a 1/2 inch to an inch of XPS, depending on how uneven the floor is. I do different thicknesses in different spots. And then I put sleepers, 2x on the flat on top of that, and infill with more rigid foam, and then put the Advantech over the top of that and paint it with some porch paint. And I've got this beautiful, smooth, shiny, comfortable to walk on, easy to clean, floor system in my basement. It's only about quarter done now, but my basement's 900 square feet, so I'll still have a decent shop until I get the rest of it done.
Cool.
What did you do with the poly? Did you bring it up the walls?
So I'm bringing it up the side of I didn't run it all the way to the stone walls because the walls are really jagged and I don't have liquid water, bulk water coming in. It's just humidity or moisture coming up through the slab or probably through the walls or the mortar in some places. But so what I did is I left it back about 3 or 4 inches, especially since I don't feel comfortable putting up anything up against the stone walls anyway. Everything's going to be central in the room. And so I'm actually going to pour concrete and use a section of PVC pipe to basically make a gutter around the whole thing. So if I ever do have any water leak from a water heater or anything like that, I didn't want to go through the trouble of digging, putting drainage mat in, plus it's a cost thing, and, digging down and putting sump pump and all that stuff. So I'm basically, there is sort of like a well underneath one part of the basement. So I'm basically going to drive this gutter system to that. There's sort of a dry well underneath there. So yeah.
How about you, Jeff? What have you been doing?
Nothing that really is relevant.
Editing podcasts.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian? You've been traveling, so you probably haven't been working on your apartment.
Well, I actually have. I'm staying at my mom's house for a few weeks, and I actually have some stuff to do here, which is
what are you doing?
Which is exciting, although very minimal. I have some little touch-up painting to do. Fixed some broken curtains the other day. I have a transition strip between some wood flooring and tile flooring to repair. And well, last night I changed the filter in her furnace.
Has that ever been done?
In the ductwork? Yeah, it has been done. Interestingly, I learned how important, being smart with the mechanical room is, because the I don't know what came first. I'm pretty sure though that the plumber installed the water heater so close to the furnace that you can't possibly, there's no way to get the filter in without bending it, without creasing it before you put it in. It's impossible. I tried every which angle and you can't do it. So and
there are hundreds. How many units are in this building?
Oh yeah, it's a big condo complex.
Yeah.
So you can't possibly have a very effective filter anymore in there, which is really unfortunate. I don't know what the solution is, except literally to move the water heater.
How does this stuff happen? Maybe
the plumber doesn't know where the filter goes in the furnace.
Gosh.
Oh man. Yeah, I'll tell you what. Some of the happiest moments I've ever had in working on houses over the years is when I was on a job site and walked into a basement or a utility room and saw like beautifully laid out plumbing or electrical wires, stuff that looks almost like a printed circuit board. It's like, there's somebody that really cares about their work and knows what they're doing.
So I blame the designers, perhaps unfairly, but somebody knew how much space you need to have these things, and they just ignored it, right? They just decided that space was too valuable, and they made it living space. So,
yeah.
I rewired a light fixture that I am delighted with. It's over the sink. We had this ugly kind of marbly wall sconce that was up there that our builder put up there, and admittedly, we picked it out for the space, but it was never our favorite. So I took what we describe as the UFO light, which is this like brushed aluminum thing from the 60s, and I rewired it and put it on a bracket or a pipe so it would hang over our sink. And I'll put a photograph of that up on the podcast page so you can all check it out. But the cool part of it is the light, the bulb shines through the shade, so it kind of has this luminescent UFO quality. And it's a piece we've repurposed 3 different ways. First, it was a swag that we had in our house in Stowe. And then when we added the second story, it became the light over the front door on the inside. So it would be the first light you turn on when you come in the house. And now this is his 3rd incarnation. And perhaps it's maybe its best version.
So wait, I have a question though. When you moved out of your house in Stowe, you just decided that this fixture was too good to leave behind, so you took it with you?
Yeah, we stole it.
I actually think about that a lot when I'm building stuff. Like in my kitchen, I'm like, should I build a built-in island or should I build a freestanding island? Because am I going to want to put all that work into it and then leave it here when I'm done?
Yeah.
I like the detail that you did with the little pipe. Patrick found like a pipe fitting that fit on the brass lamp, those threaded tubes, to make this little dog leg so that the thing hangs out in an interesting way. Sometimes I wish that the hardware store was more like a big erector set. You could just go in there and everything kind of made it up together, and you could just pick and choose your parts. I mean, you can do that if you're smart and you look long enough, but it's kind of a neat way of building stuff.
Over the years, we've been sent a number of fixtures that people make themselves, and I really like it's rare. It's a rare project, but whenever I see it, I think like these are great projects. And fairly simple to do. Like the parts are available to make custom light fixtures, and I've even seen people just kind of put porcelain bulb holders against the walls and then design sort of a sconce that goes around it. So sort of a sculptural sconce, maybe they were artistic or some sort of crafts person, work with metal or whatever. And there's just so much you can do with lighting on your own if you're willing to get creative.
And I think you have to, because if you're a person of normal means, light fixtures are ugly. And generally speaking,
too. They're really
and good ones are really expensive.
Yeah.
Every time I rip a nice piece of wood on the table saw and just shave a little piece off and see the light shining through, it'd be really nice to build like a veneer shade on a lamp. I haven't completed that project yet, but that's definitely on my top 10 to-do list.
Yeah, I've seen them made with copper sort of shades. I've seen them made with where the light just kind of comes out around it. I've seen them made with rice paper, kind of soji looking kind of fixtures. Justin Fink made his own for his kitchen, and I believe he just was able to find cable that could hang, bulb holders and globes, all from sort of different sources, and put it together to make some really nice looking fixtures.
I'm going to say wrap up this conversation by saying if you all listening have made your own light fixtures and want to share with the team, I would be grateful. I'd love to see those, and we'll put those up on the podcast page and share them on social media. So help us out.
There's one other question I want to say before we leave our little conversation here. It's related to what Brian's been doing. How many people out there, when they go to a relative's house, if you're a handy person, are you expected to fix or build something? Because it's funny in my family, my dad's the reason why I'm handy, because he works on things constantly. He's retired now and all he does is tinker. And he never expects me to help with a whole lot around the house. But if I go to my in-laws' house, it's like they have a list waiting for me. Like, oh, are you going to repair that board on the deck and tape that seam over there?
That's why I don't visit family anymore, Rob. I just stay the heck away.
I'd like to hear what this normal situation is out there for the rest of the building community.
You guys remember our conversation about how to protect exterior foam foundation installations? Yeah. So
Yes.
I asked for feedback from our listeners on how to do that. And I heard from a couple folks, principally our spiritual and editorial advisor, Mike Guertin. And he wrote a missive on how he does it. I'm going to pick some highlights because his email is pretty long, but I will put up the entirety of it on the podcast page so folks who are interested can take a look. He says there are several brush-on, trowel-on, spray-on, and roll-on coatings like Flex Coat, Tough 2, and others that create a hard shell much like an EIFS coating They aren't able to withstand a hammer blow. An aggressive weed whacker operator can damage the surface, but they're decent. The protective product I liked best was Protecto Wrap Protecto Bond. It was like an SBS single sheet roofing membrane for at-grade foam board. Colored granular surface with peel and stick backing. It was easy to install, waterproof and durable. Unfortunately, it was discontinued when Protecto Wrap was no longer able to source the coating. I've lobbied them for several years to bring it back. Maybe you and your listeners can help bring it back. Just email or call the company and bug the heck out of them. You heard it from Mike Guertin, folks. Go bug the heck out of Protecto Wrap. He says PT plywood works fine provided it's treated to UC48 or UC4C so it can withstand long-term below-grade contact. Some contractors use cellular PVC as a cover board, but most manufacturers don't support the use. Same with fiber cement backer board. It works in warmer climates, but manufacturers don't back it up, and when used in cold climates, it will delaminate. I've settled on a couple options. Boral True Exterior trim is approved for at-grade and below-grade use, so I run a 1x12 at grade to cover the foam and then siding above that. Another is synthetic brick stone. Thin manufactured stone adhered to the wire mesh that's secured directly to the foam, but I do break the rules and bring the stone to grade. Manufacturers typically require a 2 to 4 inch space above grade. That's got to look goofy, right? Stone doesn't start halfway up the wall, right? You know. The big issue that many contractors don't address when installing exterior foam is proper termite shield at the top of the foam and the top of the foundation line. Many foam products don't have boric acid mixed in the formulation and are prone to insects tunneling through. So a termite shield is needed to force the insects to the exterior face of the foam so their activity can be monitored. I don't know of an XPS foam that has a boric acid incorporated, but some EPS products, both foam panels and ICF blocks, have boric acid added so they aren't prone to insect infestation. We heard from another listener, and I'll put his email up on the podcast page too, but he had some suggestions for other similar products, and I appreciate everyone who weighed in on that. I still don't think we have the perfect product, and I think Mike would reinforce that.
So we got just a couple of days ago, I was on Instagram on our Fine Homebuilding account, and we got a note, a message from a guy named Brent, who's a furniture maker in Ohio. And he's like, look what I saw at Menards. And I don't know if everybody knows, but Menards is a big building supply and chain. I mean, they're more than that, but they have a lot of building supplies in the upper Midwest, basically from like North Dakota down to all the way down to West Virginia. They have a whole section on their website about stuff like this. And he pointed out that Styro Industries has a foam that comes with various different coatings on it. Some looks like an aggregate, some of it looks like stucco, and it's already like ready to go. It's kind of the same thing.
I'm glad you bring that up, Rob, because the other listener who mentioned that very product said it's good, but it has a couple flaws. He's like, you have to miter the corners, right? Because the coating doesn't wrap the edges, right? So and that seems kind of weird to miter foam and expect it to hold up in that application. He also says the trim pieces don't exactly match the color of the surface on the foam. So it's less than perfect. And he also said the expansion anchors that are typically used to install this require a very odd size of rotary hammer bit. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot with these wacky details. Anywho, so we had another discussion about building cabinets, and it reinforces the point that I should stick to stuff I know more about. This comes from Charles in Queens. I'm a cabinet maker in NYC and longtime listener to the podcast. Though my interests are primarily on fine woodworking side of things, I always enjoy listening and have learned a lot from you all. I perk up whenever your conversations cross over into the domain of woodworking, and I thought I'd offer what I can from my experience. For drawer slide installation, we usually work backwards from our shop drawings. I like to mark the drawer face layout directly on the inside of the cabinet box, including the 3/16 inch reveals between the faces. Once the faces are laid out, it's a simple matter to measure up from the bottom of each drawer front to mark the location for the drawer box and slides. To simplify installation, a scrap piece of plywood about the width of your case side will be cut to length to match the distance between the bottom of the case and the bottom of the topmost drawer slide. Now that is a fantastic idea, right? You put a piece of plywood in there that holds the slide at the right place and level. I think that's brilliant. And he does that for the uppermost drawer box first, and then keeps cutting it progressively shorter to lay out the other ones. If you have multiple boxes with the same layout, you're off to the races. No need to do any additional marking. The most essential skill I've learned in making furniture is to lay things out at full scale whenever I start thinking too much. I think framers would tell you the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I was in cabinet shops, we always have big scraps of MDF lying around. And whenever I was starting a complicated kitchen cabinet, I would just get like the longest piece I could and just basically make a big story pole that I laid right on my table.
We talked a little bit in that conversation, too, about making cabinets with exposed plywood laminations. Baltic-birch is the typical material for this. But he says, having recently done a kitchen in Baltic-birch, I can offer a few comments. A freshly sharpened blade is essential, as the material splinters easily. Scoring the bottom side of every cut, even rip cuts, with the blade set at about 1/16 inch is a great insurance against blowout. When making the full cut, raising the blade higher than normal will allow the teeth to enter the work at a steeper angle, preventing chip out on the top side. Because layers alternate grain direction, you are always making cross-grain cut and therefore will always risk a blowout at the end of every cut. A cross-cut sled with a zero clearance subfence, I usually use 1/8 inch MDF, helps avoid this issue. Otherwise, a piece of scrap can be clamped or held tightly against the edge of concern. All of this is incredibly tedious for those of us without large sliding table saws with scoring blades, and additional time should be allowed in estimating the work. Finishing the edges is vigorous work. A block of hardwood with sandpaper wrapped around it and having the work set up near a low raking light will help you track your progress. This is the time to kick into low gear and be attentive and methodical. Blowout is still a risk when sanding, so it's important to keep the block flat against the edge. I use the block to soften the sharp corners as well. A router with a small roundover bit works most of the time, but I find it's not worth risking the inevitable blowout. It's worth paying attention to grain direction here, as Baltic-birch is notorious for splintering. The sandpaper can easily catch and dive under the grain if you're not careful, and it is an unwelcome distraction to have it remove these spears from your hand. Despite its price and glowing reputation, a truly flat piece of Baltic-birch is a rare thing and can cause problems when used for doors, especially larger ones in inset cabinets. The best solution is to use birch veneered MDF and then band the edges in Baltic-birch edge banding. This can be ripped from your scrap pieces or purchased in rolls. An alternative would be to laminate 2 3/8 inch thick pieces of Baltic in a vacuum press, which produces a flatter panel, but many of us will not have access to that equipment. Some would regard a lot of tedium described above as overly fussy, but in the end, it adds only a marginal amount of extra time and care will deliver really stunning results. Apologies for the long-winded note. I just wanted to take the opportunity to share it in case any of you can benefit in your own projects. Thanks for all the work you do. I've been a listener since the podcast began, and though I have no idea what you're talking about most of the time, I enjoy it anyway.
So
we have the best listeners, I swear.
Blowout is the topic of the day, I guess. So, what he's talking about, like with sanding the edge, it's like natural to want to sand along the edge of something. But like, I remember sanding veneer panels like that. And it's like, you're almost sanding away from the cut and just at a slight angle, because anytime you go across the grain, it's so easy to tear stuff out. And a lot of times we would even use a fine file for stuff like that.
Brian and I were talking about this independently, the podcast, and he made the point that if you mess that up, you're starting with a new part, because there is no way you're going to fix veneer, right? It's just, and have it be not noticeable.
Yeah.
You guys seem like you're done with that.
No,
I'm thinking about this. I can't get those splinters out of my mind. I've had that exact experience. And
it's awful.
Yeah, and you don't see that little splinter in the veneer, and I've had that exact experience where the paper grabs it, and next thing you know, it's underneath your fingernail or something, and it's no fun. And like you just mentioned, Patrick, your workpiece is shot.
Yeah. I mean, if you're really good sometimes there's some tricks you can use to fix a piece of veneer.
I
But
say, and if you're making these for a client who can afford them, they are not going to accept a
Oh, no.
fix. You know?
Yeah, if you're cutting a panel and you damage, you cut a new panel. But what do you do if it's book matched veneer? Or then you're really screwed. But one thing last time we were talking about the cabinet drawer slides, and it's like I was trying to rack my brain because it's been a few years since I've worked in cabinet shops, and it's like, oh, just like anything, when you're working on a job site, it takes a little while to sort of like bring back to your memory all those little tips and tricks you pick up over the years on how to like make this stuff work. And it's like we share our offices with Fine Woodworking, and there seems to be a spectrum of people and their tolerances for attention to detail or fussiness. And this kind of falls in the middle somewhere. It's like it's rare that I put in my personal projects the attention to detail that he's talking about. But when you have a clean workspace and the right tools, and even though
you're getting paid.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, that's why, when I've done this kind of stuff, it's usually because I'm getting paid to make this thing the best I possibly can. But now that I'm like trying to like slow it down and enjoy my work a little bit more around the house, I'm like, sometimes it just pays to put in that little extra effort to make it the best you can.
We also heard from Dave on a completely unrelated subject, but it's got a timeliness that I think makes it especially important. Dave says, I thought I would take a little time to relay my experience about being COVID conscious from a business standpoint. There's also a moral imperative here, but I can leave that to another discussion. I created a page on my website dealing my company's COVID safe practices, and I enforce the policy with my crew, which is easy since they want to behave as safely as possible anyway. I put it forward in my contracts and make no bones about the expectations of my employees and clients. Masks must be worn, distancing as much as possible as expected, hygiene and disinfection regularly must be performed, etc. The reaction I have received to this has been instructive. A number of folks have contracted with me as a result of being COVID safe, and many have had prior otherwise happy relationships with other builders who have explicitly refused to wear a mask. I live in a very small town, population 1,200, and relationships matter. My business plan prioritizes client interaction, so I fully intend to keep these new clients by doing good work and caring about their health. If I end up putting another builder out of business who doesn't care or even refuses to care about our community's health, while that's not my goal as a builder, I'm fine with that. So just to say, being COVID safe makes good business sense. There you go. I wouldn't want some COVID contractor coming to my house, right?
Yeah, I think people in general, his letter speaks to so many things about how to succeed as a contractor, from returning your phone calls to health safety. The more professional you are, the stronger your business is going to grow. And right now, the situation we're in, being health conscious with the pandemic is part of being professional. Just is.
And especially being a remodeling contractor or anybody who's working directly with the clients as opposed to like a spec builder, it's like really your business is making people happy in their personal space. It's not, it's almost like building stuff is secondary to that.
It's a service job, right?
Your first priority is giving people what they want and what makes them happy and feel comfortable. So, it's like anybody who runs a business that involves you spending time in people's home, that's your first priority, I would think.
I think you guys would agree. I have observed the more professional you are, the better clients you get, and therefore a better business you have. If you're Joe Sixpack contractor, you're not working for the best clients who have good projects and deep pockets,
That's right. And in fact, when I hear that question, how do you get that work, or how do you get those clients, the people that want to build those houses? You can usually look at the person's business and know why, know how they do it, and not that it's simple to get there. It takes patience and time and consistency and, but it's the professionalism that's going to get you there.
Yeah, totally. So our first question today comes from a Kiefer, who is an architect. Hey, FHB podcast, I got a question for y'all. I'm a sole practitioner architect in Chicago, and I've recently been commissioned to design a small cabin near a river a couple hours south of the city in Climate Zone 5. The site is in an AE flood zone, which means there's a 1% chance of flooding a year, although with climate change it seems likely that the flood chance will rise in the future. I'm planning on using a pier and beam foundation to elevate the building 42 inches above grade to get above the flood line. First question. I don't like the idea of enclosing the bottom of the building as a conditioned crawl space, which I would normally do in a more typical project, because I'm worried about mold and drying potential between the enclosure layers and the crawl space in the event of a flood. Am I crazy? Follow-up, if I leave the foundation open or design a very simple unconditioned crawl space enclosure that can dry easily or be replaced on the cheap, what can I do to prevent supply and waste plumbing mains from freezing as they come up into the conditioned space? I'd like to stay away from active systems like heat tape and lines to mitigate fire risk and ensure reliability. Hope that isn't too long. Feel free to shorten. Love the show. Kiefer, architect.
So
What do you guys think?
there seems to be a bit of confused terminology in this question, right? A pier and beam foundation is different than a crawl space foundation. So he's if he's correctly stating that he wants to build a pier and beam foundation, we're talking about piers coming up from wherever the footing needs to be, right, and supporting beams that then are carrying the structure and to the piers, and that's your sort of your very oversimplified load paths. And so as opposed to a crawl space, which has typically block or concrete walls. And he's right. In anywhere that's prone to flooding, conditioned crawl spaces aren't a great idea, because it just takes one flood to kind of devastate that area and create the need for a lot of repair work. And so even though conditioned crawl spaces are from a building health, durability, and energy efficiency standpoint, they tend to be in most areas better way to go than a vented crawl space, that's avoided in flood prone areas. But with a pier and beam foundation, it's not the same thing. And pier and beam foundations tend to be open to natural ventilation. And even when they're kind of disguised with some sort of some sort
skirting.
of skirting material, we see it in fact in South Carolina, we see it done a lot of different ways. But even when they're disguised, there tends to be plenty of ventilation through that area, and then the floor of the building is where you insulate, and that in and of itself can be tricky to detail those floors well. So I think if he really is talking about a pier and beam foundation, he doesn't have to. That question about conditioned versus unconditioned crawl spaces is moot. Now you guys tell him how to keep his plumbing lines from freezing.
Spray foam. Right, you build a chase and fill it with spray foam with the pipes inside, and usually in my experience they're about 2 feet square, right, and that gives you enough insulation that you could have a deep freeze for weeks and it wouldn't reach those pipes.
Yeah.
And I think it's
sorry.
I think you look to the coastal parts of our country, especially along the eastern seaboard and the Gulf Coast, and these details are well established. The difference is that in Chicago, you're going to have to make allowances for the pipes, which you wouldn't in places like where Brian lives in South Carolina.
Right.
But helical piers would be a great way to do this, I think. Wood pilings or concrete pilings would be another way to get this thing off the ground. But I think Kiefer has got the correct assessment that this building needs to be elevated so water can flow under it and then recede without creating a problem for the house.
Yeah, I've become more and more interested in helical piers as a footing option, and now I've seen, and we're going to publish actually in the magazine sometime this year a retrofit story where the builder was adding a second story to a house and
needed more bearing.
Yeah, needed more bearing. The engineer made him check to see if there were actual footings, because the engineer's familiar with a lot of houses built in this area, and sure enough, the house didn't have footings.
Yep.
And so they were able to drive helical piers next to the crawl space walls and attach them with brackets to the concrete and these welded brackets to the piers. And that was a very, that was a day's work to retrofit footings on this house, as opposed to
very little site disturbance too,
yeah,
right?
That's jacking up the house and installing cribbing and digging underneath the stem walls and all that.
Brian or Rob, Matt Milham recently did a story on a room addition with the floor system. I would describe it as being built upside down, right? To make it easier to put a sheathing layer on the underside of the joist to protect the insulation and the floor system, right? Do you guys remember who was the author on that piece? We should put that on the podcast page because it has some of the relevant details on building a structure like this, I would say.
Yeah, they did a weird thing where they actually built it sort of up in the air and then sort of lowered it into place, right? They sort of built the floor system like up on jacks so they could put the sheathing on the bottom and the waterproofing layers on the bottom. Who was that? And there's another article I was trying to track down. I'm pretty sure it's a place that Steve Basic might have designed, but it was like a house or an addition on or cottage on Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket that was built up on piers. And there was even a drawing where they basically did what you're talking about, Patrick, is they ran the pipe down through sort of an insulated, very small chase or sleeve into the ground to get the pipe down. I wasn't thinking that simple. I was thinking more like a lot of times you see modern houses up on piers where they'll build a very small basement or crawl space that's just like
a room.
It's just basically access for utility connections to the ground. And I think it makes a lot of sense to do something like that because, it gives you a little bit better access to your plumbing connections. And you can almost treat it like a little hot box, like where you just have it super insulated and the pipes are protected. And if possible, if you absolutely need it in a really cold climate, maybe put a small electric resistance heater in there with a thermostat. But yeah, certainly the simplest method would be just to sleeve the pipes in some sort of insulation and get them down into the ground.
You guys have heard me talk about my year-long experience living in a 1972 mobile home. And one of my landlord's yearly rituals was to have someone go under there, check the heat tape, and ensure that those systems were in place. Because with manufactured housing, that is definitely a risk. And they manage it poorly, I would say. So stay away from the heat tape is a good instinct, Kiefer. Okay. So, hello, podcast gang. Episode 313, you asked us to share any input on how to make a job easier when it comes to handling heavy materials, etc. Well, one of my recent jobs was a 1900 two-story farmhouse that was in need of much-needed support in the crawl space. The 2-foot spaced floor joist made the floor feel like you were on a trampoline and needed some reinforcement and underneath. We decided to put in a pair of beams, which were 24 feet long, triple 2x6s. The crawl space opening was in the middle of the house in a kitchen closet, and the space to crawl from the dirt, the space of the crawl space bottom to the floor joist was a whopping 16 inches. You can imagine how much of a chore it was to bring in materials to build the beams in the crawl space and dig the 10 footings that were 2x2 and 8 inches thick. Considering the low clearance required for the beams and the jacks needed to support the floor, the real issue was getting the 80 bags of concrete into the crawl space for the footings. I was not able to mix them inside, so I came up with a little buggy that was able to carry 4 buckets worth of concrete that could be pulled through the crawl space instead of manhandling buckets in such a confined space. I purchased pneumatic tires from Harbor Freight for easy rolling on the dirt floor and had some angle iron lying around from a trailer repair. I had a friend that owns a fabricating shop welded up for me at very little cost. I now have a handy little cart with pivoting front end for steering and the ability to pull it through the crawl space with a rope. This part of the job consisted of 2 guys mixing concrete, 2 more hauling concrete from outside to the crawl space opening, and me in the crawl space hauling the concrete to the forms. We completed the job in start to finish in about 4 hours, and I couldn't have done it without the help of this creation. I attached a photo. Let me know if you have any issues seeing it. Love the podcast. Nolan from Danville, Illinois. Rob, did you see this guy's cart? It had your name written all over it, buddy.
Yes. In fact, I said, Nolan and his fabricator friend, they're definitely people I want to know. I'd be happy to collaborate with them on a project, because it was an ingenious little machine. Like, so picture those 4-wheel pneumatic tire garden carts that look like little stake bodies, except it's like a lowrider version of that.
Yeah. So the axles are like in line with the deck, right? And the deck holds 4 5-gallon mud buckets that they were mixing concrete in and putting in there. So it was a sweet rig. So
yeah, that was a good solution.
But the ingenious,
that did not sound like a fun job.
No.
80 bags of concrete, mixing that alone is a killer.
Yeah. I mean, just crawling around in there had to be a pain in the butt. And I was thinking about it. He said 16 inches. It had to be higher than that, because how tall is a bucket of as a bucket? He must have really low buckets if he was carrying that cart on rolling it around.
Yeah, you're right, dude. That would just barely fit in there.
I didn't quite understand that either. But suffice it to say, he was in a tight space.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just have to say one thing about that cart. It was the most ingenious part of it was, you figure most of those little garden carts have like this flimsy angle iron deck that if you put 4 buckets of concrete on top of the thing would buckle in half. And the guy built, the fabricator friend of his built basically a truss. It has this post in the middle that's about as high as the buckets, and then there are these little triangular like angled bar supports.
I call them like tension rods, right?
It's like, it was such an ingenious little machine. You have to go to the podcast page and take a look at the picture, because it's pretty cool.
Even more remarkable than the cart is Nolan being the business owner and the one who's in the hole. God bless him for that, right? That is a class act.
I would imagine a lot of people would look at that job and be like, no, thanks, because it's
Can't be done.
Oh, man.
Let's see. Hello, FHB crew. I currently run a handyman/light remodeling company here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I recently did a bath renovation which required a new vanity top. 2 days after finishing the project, the client called and said that the top had cracked. While the supplier did provide a replacement under warranty, my question is, who pays for the labor to replace it? This is the first time I've run into this situation and would love your time-honored wisdom on the subject. Thanks for the great content and keep up the good work. What's a simple answer? You do. It's unfortunate, but it's your project, man.
I went and looked at a bunch of warranties from some various manufacturers, in fact, including one that was made synthetic countertop materials. And the words in their warranty read, it covers, replacing or repairing the materials, but not any additional cost to remove, fabricate, or reinstall labor or similar activities necessary to complete the replacement or removal of the defective material. So they cover their butts. They're happy to replace a defective product, but
and I think, it's an exceptional building product that they pay for labor in a failure. It's always just the products.
Yeah, and warranties are really tricky. And if you're working with any material that has a warranty and you want to be able to hold the manufacturer to that warranty, it's smart to really read it, because there can be variations even in a system warranty versus a product defect warranty. There can be caveats about installation details. So if that's a concern that you may need to take a manufacturer, make a claim on a warranty, then smart first to really read through that warranty.
We touched on it earlier, and with remodeling, relationships are everything, so you're going to have to take it on the chin once in a while and just do it, because, your client is going to talk to all their friends, and they're either going to say, we had this problem with the vanity top and our contractor fixed it and it was a easy experience, or they're going to badmouth you and say, don't use this contractor because they were unable to fix this problem for me, and I had to deal with it myself. So,
yeah. And one thing on, your point about warranties, Brian, is that the FTC has the Federal Trade Commission, is that right? They have a page on this that I'll put a link to that talks all about what to look for on warranties, what to expect from warranties, the fact that all states have implied warranties, so your state might have more protections than an explicit warranty from the manufacturer. They talk about reaching out to your state's consumer protection office if you have any disputes, and they have a whole outline about how to go about dealing with. They recommend going to the retailer first. It's a pretty detailed and very comprehensive article. So anybody who's dealing with the stuff, we'll put a link in the podcast notes. It's a really good resource.
People ask why contractors are so risk averse, why they are so unwilling to try new products or new methods. And, if something is working, the risk of trying something new is scary, right? And you don't want to have to go back and fix stuff. You don't want unsatisfied clients. So I think that explains a lot of why folks use the same products on all projects or similar ones and stick with it. And I think there's good rationale for that.
Yeah, your ownership of that project doesn't end when you walk off the job site at the end of the project. You basically own that project for at least a year, if not many years, and in a lot of places you're held to that. But really, like you said, it's good business to be responsible for your work in that way.
Jeff, you have any thoughts on this?
Well, the only thing that popped into my head was, on the commercial side, labor is sometimes warranted, but you have to be certified by the manufacturer before that happens.
Mm-hmm. In the case of commercial roofing, like we were talking with Diami on the Pro Talk podcast.
That's what made it popped into my mind.
Glad you're on the show, man.
For that one thought.
This comes from Dan. I regrettably write to you with what has become a taboo topic, roof ventilation. My partner and I recently purchased a modular home. She wants to turn the 512 pitched roof attic into usable space. To do this, we need to install EPS foam in between the rafters as well as a layer over to get to an R40 ceiling. The catch here is that the roof system was assembled with a crane, where the roof peak assembly connects to the roof section extending from the soffits. There's framing material following the flow of air. Included is an image of the proposed method to allow air through the framing blockage. Would drilled holes close to the roof deck provide enough airflow? I would hate to invest time and money into finishing this space, only to learn that snow is melting and water is wreaking havoc. We live in the southern tier of Western New York, climate zone 5. Hoping your advice will set our minds at ease. Thanks for all you do. Keep up the strong work. Okay, so I contacted Dan outside the podcast to get some clarification. So Dan lives in a modular house. There are modules set on a crane on this building site. And as you guys know, your floor system has to be either made for living space or not. And a good way to cut costs in your attic is to lighten up the framing so you don't have to buy more floor system than you need. And so my first question to Dan was, do you know the floor load rating on this space? And it is indeed 30 pounds per square foot, which is at the barest minimum of what's allowed by code. And I think you're not even allowed to do that on accepting for what they describe as sleeping rooms. So that's the lightest floor you can get away with. He said it's not a big deal because their expectation is to use the space as a painting studio, reading and writing retreat, no appliances, pottery wheels, brick pizza ovens, or other heavy equipment. So I think that makes it okay. So to get to the question, did you guys look at the pictures and what would you do with this assembly?
Yeah. I mean, I think if he wants to insulate that roof, he needs to go with an unvented roof assembly.
Spray foam on the bottom, rigid foam on top.
Yeah, that's the when space is limited in a roof assembly for a cathedral ceiling, and you need to get as much R value in there as possible and have the right vapor control. A flash and fill or flash and bat system is probably his best option. I think it's unlikely that he's going to put exterior.
Rip all the roofing off, change all the overhangs,
Yeah. And fibrous insulation in a unvented assembly in a cold climate is risky.
What do you think about, is he going to have enough depth to do it entirely from the bottom side? I mean, I'm guessing it's R49 where he's at. So, I mean, that is a ton of insulation.
He's not going to get to the code minimums. So that depends if the current code minimums in the IRC are what his inspector will want to see, and what what he thinks is appropriate. At a minimum, he would need to have the right thickness of closed cell spray foam against the roof sheathing for dew point control.
Can you briefly explain what that means, Brian, to folks who might not be familiar with those concepts?
Sure. So because it's an unvented assembly, so it's an unforgiving assembly. So you really need to avoid any kind of condensation happening within that assembly. And where the condensation would happen, it would be on the face of the installed and cured closed cell spray foam. And keep in mind that it does have to be closed cell spray foam in this situation. And so to make sure that that wouldn't be a condensing surface, and without getting too scientific and talking about dew points and whatnot, that surface of that foam can't be cold. It needs to be warm. So you have to have an adequate thickness of that foam so that you have enough insulating value that the face of the foam stays above the dew point temperature. It stays warm enough so that as either air gets into that assembly or vapor drive moves into that, pushes vapor into that assembly, it doesn't condense on that rigid foam. That'd be the way that he could potentially make this work. There's other options. I mean, we've seen builders, in all sorts of different ways, fur the ceilings down to make more depth. There's other ways to go, but if he wasn't going to modify the structure at all or add anything to it, and this is a truss assembly, it looks like from the photos, so you don't want to modify a truss assembly really ever. And so his best bet, I think, would be the flash and batter, flash and fill system.
What were you going to say, Rob?
Or just spray foam, or just full spray foam, which is possible too. Although spray foam is just not a very climate friendly material. I'll throw that in there.
Yeah, so he said he was shooting to get to R40, and it seems like what he was saying is that he wanted to infill the rafters in the truss system with rigid foam, and then put rigid foam over the inside surface to add that extra thickness. The one thing is, like, if you're infilling, that's sort of getting into the realm of what we call cut and cobble. There's a whole bunch of articles on GBA about that, where when you infill rafters or walls, any framing with rigid foam, you then have to seal that rigid foam to keep the moisture that Brian was talking about earlier from migrating to the outer edges of the cold surface of the sheathing and condensing and causing damage. And it's a difficult thing to do. But maybe if he truly were doing that, putting rigid foam between the joists, either cutting it tight and pressure fitting it, or putting it in there with some spray foam or other sealant, and then putting another layer of rigid foam underneath that, if he did a really good job of air sealing that continuous layer underneath, then that would be less of a concern to worry about the moisture. He mentioned he was using EPS, which is a vapor permeable. So then basically, if you have a well air sealed ceiling assembly, maybe there's a little bit less concern about that vapor drive, because it can dry to the interior. The one thing I did notice is that it does look like one of those trusses that's designed for attic space. Whether or not they designed the floor for attic space is another question, but it is one of those open center truss systems that's designed to be a space if it's left unfinished like that.
Yeah. So Rob, that's a good point. That in a unventilated cathedral ceiling assembly, the drying path is inward. So, for example, if you did do a flash and fill system, you wouldn't want an interior vapor retarder or vapor barrier, because that's how that assembly is going to dry should it get wet. Yeah.
Dan, you need to have a conversation with your building inspector ahead of doing all this, I wanted you to ask them what R value are they expecting, because that's going to guide this whole decision-making tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the first thing you need to do, and then figure out how to get that R value in your assembly.
Yeah, because if he needs the really high R value up there to meet code,
R40 is high.
Yeah, I mean, spray foam might be the only way, other than doing some other kind of rigid foam. But I mean,
isn't closed cell about R5 per inch? Isn't that what like the general value is? So you need 8 inches of that, and maybe you have rafters that are 2x10s, and then that would work. But
you also have to worry about ceiling height restrictions too, because I couldn't really tell how high that ceiling was in there.
He did correct himself later in our correspondence that the roof is actually 712, not 512. So that seems like a more comfortable space, right?
Yep. But I mean, meaning that, like, what is it? Usually 50% of the space in an attic for the sloped ceiling has to be 50% of it, I think, has to be 7 feet or taller. I think that's the typical code in most places. So if you start packing down that foam insulation, you could run the risk of not meeting the ceiling height requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Good question, Dan. Thank you. I wish you luck with your project. Please keep us posted on what you do. I'd love to see how you transform this space. It looks cool.
Yeah.
I got one other thing here today. Hi, Patrick. Hope this email finds you well. I've been looking for a sawhorse design for my son who has limited shop space. We both like using some old school benches, but they take up a lot of space in the shop and when transporting. So he's talking about, carpenters used to carry around a bench to do higher work, like trimming out windows and doors and stuff, head casings. And you used to use them for sawing, like, when you had a hand saw, you'd use it to do cross cuts and even rips. But a lot of folks use them, but as he suggests, it's bulky, right? So here's my solution. The short YouTube video I created over the weekend gives a quick introduction to design. Keep up the great job, both in print and with the podcast, Carl. So he made these collapsible and nesting saw benches, and there's a YouTube video that I will link on the podcast page. But if you all like that style of work surface, I would totally tell you to check out his folding version, because it is pretty freaking smart. And I'm thinking of building some myself. Did you guys see this?
No, I didn't see the link.
What do you think, Brian?
I'm trying to get it back up. I want to refresh my memory.
So I don't know how to describe it, except that it's got like probably a 12-inch deep top that's probably 3 foot long, and it creates a reasonable surface for doing edge routing or other kinds of like woodworky type things. And underneath the top is a shelf that you can put your tools in, and everything works pretty good. It's a sweet design, and I'm happy to share it, Carl, because we love talking about sawhorses on the show.
Oh my gosh, sawhorses seem to be like the topic of the year.
Sawhorses won't go away.
we just put them in the recent issue of the magazine. Where I just did a list page of all the articles we've done over the years on the website. Keep those sawhorses coming.
It's fun, right? It's really fun to see people's creative problem solving and working methods. Something so ubiquitous has so many variations. It's very interesting.
And what a lot of it too is about the fact that we all have very different priorities and needs in the different types of projects that we do. And there's a lot of different creative ways to solve each of those needs. So there's probably an infinite number of solutions out there.
Yeah,
Brian, go ahead, man.
I'm looking at it again now. This is pretty darn slick.
Can you explain it a little bit more detailed? Or?
Well, we can share the video, which will do a much better job. Because he made a video and he made a nice video. So why don't we put that on if he's amicable to it, why don't we put that on our show notes page? And
absolutely,
it's very thoughtful. It reminds me of something John White would have. Not that anyone listening knows who John White is, but John White was the wood shop manager at Fine Woodworking for a long time, and he just sort of had a way of
making smart stuff,
engineering and building the most useful kind of shop made tables and benches and jigs and router tables and all sorts of great stuff.
I really want to thank our listeners for sharing your stuff with us. It makes the show better and more interesting, and I love hearing from you. So please do that. It's great, right?
It makes the show. It is
It makes
the
the
show.
show. Yeah.
You all are the show.
You guys have anything to say before we part company?
I don't know, Brian. Do we want to talk about anything that's coming up right now? We've got a big list of webinars this year. We're going to have more webinars, I think, than we ever have, because people just seem to be really be enjoying them. I mean, our latest one that's on window choices by Enrico. How do you say his last name?
I think it's Molinari.
Molinari. He's an energy efficiency expert, and we already have a couple hundred people signed up for that. So
yeah, he's great.
I'm sorry, guys. Are we talking about something in the past? Because this show is going to not air until
I'll tell you, you'll still be able to go to the website and watch a video recording of it if the webinar has passed. But
it's our January webinar. So if you're listening to this later in January, go to our website and listen to it. If you're listening to this earlier in January, sign up for it. It's going to be great. He talks a lot about windows and doors and their relationship to our comfort in our home. So he knows all about them in terms of energy efficiency, but he really can speak to how they affect our comfort living in homes. And then in February we have Tina Govan is going to do a webinar on small house designing small homes, like great ideas for small homes. We've got a bunch of sponsored things lined up about decks. We've got one coming up later in the year about women in construction. So we've got, Rob's right. We're gonna have a lot of great webinars to check out this year. And I'll say this now, and we'll see how the year goes. We're planning for a live summit in 2021 in the fall, just crossing our fingers and being hopeful that that's possible. So we're working on a great summit for the year, and we'll take it online like we did last year if we have to. But we really hope that we can all be together.
So,
Rob, can I ask you, where do those webinars live? How can folks find those?
I was just going to say that. So if you check our webinar page, which is just finehomebuilding.com/webinars, that's, you can periodically check there to see what's coming up, and you can go there to see every webinar we've ever produced and watch the video recordings of them. But the thing about the webinars is that you get access to these people to ask questions, all these pros that we have on them. So it's good to show up live. Also, if you just go to the website and find the little box to sign up for our newsletters, we will always promote those webinars a week or two in advance of them going live in the newsletter. So the best way to stay up to date with anything that's going on with us is to subscribe to our newsletter.
And we should be announcing the special International Builder Show podcast that we're recording. And we're going to have some folks from Mike Guertin is going to be on the show, and Brian Euler will be our West Coast correspondent, and the three of us will be talking about things at the show and other stuff, and I hope you'll tune into those 6 episodes that will be centered around the Builder Show, and I'm spacing on when that is, but I think it was February 9 through 12. So thank you, Jeff. So look for those, and that should be a good time. I like hanging out with those guys. It should be fun. I also want to tell folks to check out the Pro Talk podcast if you haven't. Recently had some great guests. Dennis Bissett, who is my wife's uncle and also an amazing cabinet maker. If any of you have been to the Welcome Center in Brattleboro, Vermont, on, what is that, Route 89, I believe, or 91, I forget. It would be Route 91. And he built the desk in the center of this amazing timber frame building. And it's a 5-sided desk that integrates stone and native Vermont materials, slate, native lumber. And the thing is amazing. He's a true artisan, and he's worth listening to. And then yesterday we recorded with Michael Ingwe, who is an architect in Manhattan and in the Brooklyn. And he was amazing to talk to, too. So the show is usually very interesting. I would tell you all, if you haven't checked it out, you should. You guys have any parting words?
You covered it.
All right.
We've said too much already.
True. Well, thanks to all of you for bearing with us today, and thanks to Brian, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. It was a pleasure spending time with you all today. Please stay safe, keep craft alive, and happy building.